The third bullet is the one that changes everything. The first two, they just make you angry. They tear through muscle and sinew, a hot poker of rage that reminds you you're alive, that you can still fight. They're a debt you promise yourself you'll repay in kind. But the third one is different. It doesn't burn. It sinks. A cold, heavy little secret that finds a home deep inside you. It doesn't just make you angry. It makes you tired. A deep in your bones tired that tells you the trail is ending, one way or another. It's the one that makes you pray for a place to die. And as my horse staggered through the shimmering Colorado heat, the dust turning to mud where my blood dripped from the saddle, that's all I was looking for. A quiet patch of earth to call my own. The letter in my saddlebag, the one that had started this whole damn journey, felt like a tombstone I was carrying on my back. 3 months of hard riding, of sleeping with one eye open and a gun in my hand, all for a ghost. All to end up here, bleeding out in a land that God himself had clearly forgotten. Through the haze of heat and pain, I saw it. A ranch, or what was left of one. It wasn't the sprawling cattle operation I'd been told about, not the crescent moon. This place was different. It was a skeleton picked clean by the sun and the wind. Broken fence posts jutted from the baked earth like crooked teeth in a skull. The barn looked like one good gust would turn it into a pile of splinters. The Broken Wheel Ranch, a sign hanging by a single nail, groaned. Fitting. My heart, that traitorous drum in my chest, started its familiar frantic rhythm. Not now. Not when I was this close. I pressed a hand to my ribs, a useless gesture, as if I could physically hold the damn thing together. The world was tilting, the edges going dark. I slid from the saddle more than dismounted, my legs giving way as I hit the ground. The dust rose up to meet me, soft and final. And that's when I saw him. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the porch. A boy, maybe 12, maybe 13. It was hard to tell. His frame was all sharp angles, lost in clothes that had been patched so many times they were more thread than fabric. Dirt was a second skin on his face, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp, the color of new spring grass, holding a cold, calculating intelligence that didn't belong in the face of a child. He held an old, rust-pitted shotgun like he was born with it in his hands. It was pointed right at my chest. "You lost, mister?" His voice was a dry rasp, the sound of disuse, but there was no fear in it, only a weary caution. I tried to push myself up, my shoulder screaming in protest. The world spun. "Looking for the Murphy place, Crescent Moon Ranch." The boy's eyes narrowed. A flicker of something I couldn't read crossed his face. "Ain't no Murphy place for 20 miles. You're on the wrong trail." He took a step closer, the barrel of the shotgun never wavering. "This here's the Broken Wheel, and you're bleeding all over it." My jaw tightened. 3 months of planning, of tracking, of dodging the shadows that clung to my own name, and I'd made a rookie mistake. Ended up at the wrong damn place. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. A man running from his past, lost in the present, with a future that was leaking out of him one red drop at a time. I looked down. He was right. A dark crimson stain was spreading in the dust around me. My vision started to swim. "You live here alone, son?" I grunted, trying to focus on his face. The answer was obvious in the stark emptiness of the place, in the way he held himself like a lone wolf cub, ready to fight or flee at any moment. "Been alone since winter took my granddaddy," he said, his voice flat, betraying nothing. "Name's Charlie." He took another careful step. "You keep bleeding like that, the buzzards will be naming you breakfast." There it was again, that unnerving calm. This wasn't a scared kid. This was a survivor. And survivors, in my experience, were dangerous. They did what they had to, I knew. I was one of them. Or I used to be. "It's nothing," I lied, tasting copper in the back of my throat. "Nothing is what gets men buried in this country," he shot back. His eyes darted from my face to the wound, then back again. I could see the gears turning behind them. He was weighing the odds. A wounded man was a vulnerable man, but a desperate man was a deadly one. What was he seeing? A threat or an opportunity? Then he did something that surprised me. He lowered the shotgun just an inch. Got clean water inside. Bandages, too. Granddaddy always said a man's got to help where he can. The offer hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken questions. In my world, kindness was a currency rarely spent and never for free. Everyone had an angle. What was his? Was he trying to get me inside where I was weaker? Was someone else waiting in that derelict cabin? My instincts, honed by years of betrayal, screamed at me to refuse, to get back on my horse and ride until I dropped. But my body had other ideas. The ground was coming up fast. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me completely was the boy's face. His expression not of pity, but of grim, calculating assessment. He wasn't just offering help. He was making a choice, and I had a terrible feeling I wasn't going to like the price. I woke up to the smell of dust and decay and the sharp, clean scent of lye soap. I was on a cot, my shoulder wrapped in a tight, clean bandage. The throbbing had subsided to a dull ache. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamt it all. But then I saw him, Charlie. He was sitting in a chair across the small, sparse cabin, the old shotgun laid across his lap. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching me. The cabin was cleaner than it had any right to be. The floor was swept, a few worn books were neatly stacked on a stone mantel, and a tin-type photo of an old man with Charlie's same sharp eyes looked down from the wall. Every object seemed to have its place. It was the home of someone who clung to order in a world of chaos. "You're awake," he stated, his voice still flat. It wasn't a question. I pushed myself up on one elbow, testing my strength. "Seems so. Thanks for this." I gestured to the bandage. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. "You sleep loud, dreaming bad things." "The only kind I know," I admitted, my voice rough. I scanned the room again. We were alone, but something felt wrong. The silence in the cabin was too perfect, too deliberate. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of held breath, of waiting. "Where'd you learn to patch a man up like this?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Granddaddy taught me. Said you never know when you'll need to fix something that's broken, man or machine." He ran a hand over the stock of his shotgun. "Mostly I just practiced on the animals." An answer that explained everything and nothing. I swung my legs over the side of the cot, my boots placed neatly beside it. He'd taken them off. A courtesy, or a precaution, made it harder to run. My gun belt was gone. I didn't have to look far. It was hanging on a peg on the far wall, my Colt still holstered, but well out of reach. This kid didn't miss a trick. "So the county man knows you're out here alone?" I asked, watching for his reaction. His hands tightened on the shotgun for a fraction of a second. A hit. "He came by. Once. After Granddaddy passed." His voice dropped. "Talked about an orphanage, back east." He looked away toward the cabin's single grimy window. "I hide when I see his buggy on the trail. This ain't much, but it's mine." Something twisted in my gut. It was a story I knew all too well. A kid left with nothing but a piece of land and a world full of vultures looking to pick him clean. But his story felt rehearsed, too neat. He'd been surviving out here for 6 months, he'd said, through a Colorado winter. Alone? A boy his age? It was possible, but not likely. Not without help. And that's when I saw it. On the small table next to his chair was a plate with the remnants of a meal. But there were 2 forks on it. And next to the fireplace, tucked in the shadows, was a pair of boots. They were worn, caked in mud, and at least 3 times too big for a boy like Charlie. My blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. He'd been lying to me from the moment I arrived. Every word, every gesture had been a performance. This wasn't just a boy protecting his home. This was something else entirely. I was in a trap. My wound, my weakness, my misplaced trust. He'd used it all. The question was, who were the other boots for? And what did they want with me? Charlie saw me looking at the boots. The mask of the lonely orphan slipped, just for a second, and I saw a flash of pure, cold panic in his eyes. He raised the shotgun, the metallic click of the hammer being cocked echoing in the tense silence of the cabin. You should have kept your eyes to yourself, mister. The boy's face was a stone mask, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the shotgun. He was bluffing. Or maybe he wasn't. A cornered animal will do anything to survive. And this kid was more cornered than most. Easy, son, I said, raising my good hand slowly. Just an observation. Stop calling me son, he snapped, his voice cracking with a fear he was trying desperately to hide. I ain't your son. Never said you were. I kept my voice low and steady, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. But those boots over there belong to a grown man. A big man. And I'm guessing he's not the county man you've been hiding from. Charlie's jaw worked, his eyes darting from me to the cabin door and back again. He was trapped in his own lie. I pressed the advantage. So who is he, Charlie? Your granddaddy? I thought you said he was dead. He is. The boy's voice was too loud, too quick. Those were his boots. I keep 'em to remember him by. It was a good lie, a sentimental touch, but it was still a lie. The mud on them was fresh, no more than a day old. Someone had worn them recently, and there was more. A faint scent of tobacco hung in the air, the kind old men smoked, not the boy. And on the mantel next to the tintype was a small carved wooden bird. The shavings on the floor beneath it were still fresh. I had spent my life reading men, looking for the tells, the cracks in their stories. This kid was good, but he was still just a kid. He was hiding someone. Someone he was terrified of or terrified for. All right, Charlie, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Every muscle screamed, but I ignored it. I couldn't show weakness. Not now. Let's say I believe you. Let's say you're all alone out here. Then you won't mind if I take a look in that barn, just to satisfy my curiosity. Panic flashed in his eyes again, raw and undeniable. You ain't going nowhere. You're hurt. You need to rest. I feel fine, I lied, taking a slow step toward the door. Just need to stretch my legs. A little fresh air. No! He scrambled to his feet, leveling the shotgun at my chest again. You stay put. We stood there, locked in a standoff, a wounded outlaw and a desperate boy with a cabin full of secrets between us. I had to know who was out there. If it was a partner or another outlaw lying low, I was as good as dead. They'd take my horse, my gear, and leave me in a shallow grave. If it was someone else, well, I had to know. I took another step. I'm warning you, he whispered, his voice trembling. I looked him straight in the eye. I saw the fear, but underneath it, I saw something else. A fierce, desperate protectiveness. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of what I might find. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting the man in the barn. And that's when a new, terrible thought hit me. Maybe it wasn't an outlaw. Maybe the man in the barn wasn't a threat to me at all. Maybe I was a threat to him. The tension snapped. From outside, a low hacking cough echoed through the thin cabin walls. A sick man's cough. Deep and ragged. Charlie flinched like he'd been struck. His eyes squeezed shut, a silent curse on his lips. The secret was out. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The shotgun barrel dipped toward the floor. Damn it, he breathed. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. The tough, wary act was gone, replaced by the face of a terrified little boy. Please, mister, don't hurt him. He's all I've got. Before I could answer, the cabin door creaked open. An old man stood there, silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun. He was a scarecrow of a man, thin and stooped, his face a roadmap of hard years. He leaned heavily on a gnarled walking stick, and his breath came in ragged, painful gasps. But his eyes, they were the same as the boy's, the same sharp, intelligent green, and they were fixed on me with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. This was the man from the tintype photo. This was the granddaddy, Henry Winters, and he wasn't dead. Not yet. Get away from my grandson, the old man rasped, his voice a dry whisper of sound. He took a shaky step into the room, raising a trembling hand to point a long, bony finger at me. I know you're kind. You're a vulture, smelling death. Well, you'll find no carrion here. Get out. Now. Charlie rushed to his side, trying to support him. Granddaddy, no. You're supposed to be resting. He's hurt. I was just helping him. You were helping a snake into our house, boy, Henry snapped, his gaze never leaving me. He took another wheezing breath, his eyes boring into me, searching my face. A flicker of something crossed his features. Confusion, disbelief, and then recognition. A horrified recognition that chilled me to the bone. His face went pale, his eyes wide with a ghost of a memory. "No," he whispered, the sound barely audible. "It can't be." He knew me. This old man in this forgotten corner of the world knew who I was, and whatever he saw in my face terrified him more than any outlaw's reputation. The letter in my saddlebag suddenly felt like a block of ice against my back. The job I was supposed to be on, the men I was supposed to meet, it all felt a million miles away. My carefully constructed world, my life of running and hiding under assumed names, was collapsing around me. The old man's breath hitched. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He looked at my face, my eyes, the way I stood. He was seeing more than just a stranger. He was seeing a ghost from 30 years ago. "Frankie," he whispered, the name hanging in the air like a death sentence. No one had called me that in a lifetime. Not since I was a boy. Not since before the war, before the robberies, before the man I am now had buried the boy I used to be. My real name, my birth name, a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud since the day I walked away from my family and never looked back. Franklin. And the only person in the world who ever called me Frankie was my older brother, Henry. The brother I'd thought was dead for the last decade. The brother whose face now stared back at me, ravaged by time and sickness, from across a dusty cabin. My throat was tight. I couldn't speak. The carefully built walls I'd spent a lifetime erecting around my heart crumbled to dust. I wasn't Frank Dalton, bounty hunter. I wasn't just some lost drifter. I was standing in my own family's home. The boy, Charlie, he wasn't just some orphan. He was my nephew. The letter I'd been carrying wasn't a job contract. It was a letter I'd written years ago, a desperate, drunken plea for forgiveness that I'd never had the courage to send. I'd come to this territory not for a job, but to find him, to see if there was anything left to salvage. I'd used the lie of the Crescent Moon Ranch as an excuse, a way to get close without admitting the truth even to myself. And I'd stumbled into the one place on earth I'd been searching for and running from my entire life. "Henry?" My voice was a choked whisper. He recoiled as if I'd struck him. The flicker of recognition in his eyes hardened into pure, cold fury. The look of a man staring at the source of all his life's pain. "So it is you," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that seemed to give him a terrible, unnatural strength. "After all these years, you finally decided to crawl back." He turned his venomous glare on Charlie. "This boy is your uncle, the great Franklin Winters, the man who destroyed our family, the reason your grandmother is in her grave, the reason your parents are dead." Every word was a hammer blow. Charlie stared at me, his young face a canvas of confusion and horror. "My parents? I thought they died of fever." "Fever?" Henry let out a harsh, barking laugh that dissolved into a terrible coughing fit. He leaned on Charlie, gasping for air. "That's the story I told him, the story I told everyone. The truth is much uglier." He straightened up, his eyes blazing with a 30-year-old fire. "Your parents weren't taken by fever, Charlie. They were murdered by men who came looking for him." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I remembered the posse, the bank job that went wrong in Kansas, the partners I'd double-crossed. I thought I'd gotten away clean. I never knew they'd tracked me, that they'd found my family's farm, that they'd... Oh, God. "They came looking for the money." Henry's voice was a low, venomous growl. "Money your uncle there stole from them. Your father, my son. He stood up to them, tried to protect your mother. They shot them both down in their own home, left them for the boy to find." He pointed a trembling finger at me again. "That's your legacy, Franklin. That's the blood on your hands. You didn't just run away. You brought a curse down on all of us." The air in the cabin was thick, unbreathable. Charlie looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. The stranger who he'd shown kindness to, the man he'd bandaged and sheltered, was the monster from his family's darkest chapter. I wasn't just an outlaw. I was the author of all his pain. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but what words were there? What could I possibly say to undo the ruin I had wrought? Suddenly, from outside came the sound of approaching horses, not one, but several, moving fast. Henry's head snapped toward the door, his and Charlie's faces instantly pale with a new, more immediate terror. "The Hendersons!" Charlie whispered, his voice shaking. "Get back inside." "Now!" Henry ordered, shoving Charlie toward the rear of the cabin. His eyes met mine, and for a second, the family hatred was replaced by the shared instinct of survival. "You wanted to see what happens when your past comes calling, Frankie? Well, you're about to get your wish. They've been trying to run us off this land for a year, and they ain't the kind to ask twice." The riders reined in hard just outside the cabin, the sound of their horses and the creak of leather filling the air. A loud, belligerent voice boomed. "Winters, you old goat! We know you're in there. We've come for your answer. You selling this pile of dirt or not?" Henry grabbed the old shotgun from Charlie's hands, his knuckles white. He looked at me, his face a grim mask. "They want the land," he rasped. "But it ain't the land they're really after. It's the water." The water? What was he talking about? "There's a spring," he said, his voice low and urgent, "hidden up in the rocks behind the barn. The only year-round source in this whole valley. They find it, they'll dam it up and bleed every other rancher dry. This land is all we got left. It's all the boy has." The pounding on the door began, heavy and insistent. "Don't make us come in there, old man." My mind was reeling. My brother, my nephew, a murdered family, and now a siege. My past and present were colliding in a storm of violence, and I was standing in the eye of it. Henry looked from the door to me, his expression grim. He was trapped. He was sick, weak, and trying to protect his grandson from a gang of predators. And the only person who could help him was the man he hated most in the world, the man who had started it all. The door shuddered under a heavy kick. Splinters flew inward. One more kick and it would give way. "They won't stop," Charlie whispered from the corner, his face ashen. "They never stop." Henry looked at the shotgun in his hands, then at my gun belt, still hanging on the wall. He knew a shotgun wasn't enough against 3 or 4 armed men. He knew he was too sick to put up a real fight. His eyes, filled with decades of resentment, met mine again. A silent, agonizing decision was being made. Could he trust the devil he knew to fight the devils at the door? "Can you still use one of these?" he rasped, nodding toward my Colt. It wasn't a question of forgiveness. It was a question of survival. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Like breathing." With a grimace of pure disgust, he jerked his chin toward the wall. "Then get it, and prove you're worth more than the trouble you bring." I moved, my body screaming in protest, every step a fresh agony from the bullet wound. I grabbed the gun belt, my fingers closing around the familiar worn leather. The weight of it was reassuring, a cold comfort in a world turned upside down. As I strapped it on, the front door burst open with a crack of splintering wood. 3 men filled the doorway, blocking out the light. They were rough men, with the cruel, confident faces of bullies who were used to getting their own way. The man in the lead was huge, a beard covering a weak chin, a smug sneer on his face. This must be Henderson. "Well, well," Henderson drawled, his eyes taking in the scene. The old man with the shotgun, me with my hand on my Colt. "Looks like the old goat finally got himself some help. You a relative, friend? Or just another fool about to die for a worthless piece of rock?" "He's family," Henry snarled, surprising me. "And you're trespassing, Henderson. Get off my land before I fill you with buckshot." Henderson laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "Your land? This land is ours. You're just too stubborn to admit it." He took a step inside, his men fanning out behind him. His eyes fell on me, and he looked me up and down, a slow, appraising gaze. "I don't know you, mister, but you picked the wrong side. We've been patient with this old man, but our patience has run out." His gaze lingered on my face, and a strange look of dawning familiarity crossed his features, just as it had with Henry. But this wasn't the recognition of a long-lost brother. This was something colder, something predatory. "Wait a minute," he said slowly, his voice dropping. "I do know you. From a picture. An old bounty poster." He squinted. "Dalton. No, that wasn't it. It was Winters. Franklin Winters. The ghost of Kansas." My blood turned to ice. How could he possibly know that name? That specific name? It was a moniker I'd picked up 20 years ago and buried just as fast. Only a handful of people in my old crew ever knew it. Henderson's smug sneer widened into a triumphant, vicious grin. "I knew it. I knew if we squeezed this land hard enough, you'd show up, like a rat crawling back to its nest." He looked from me to Henry and back again, the pieces clicking into place in his cruel mind. "My father told me about you. He told me you'd come back for your brother one day. He said to be patient, that revenge is a dish best served cold." My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. His father? Who was his father? "You betrayed him?" Henderson growled, his voice thick with a hatred that mirrored my brother's. "Left him to take the fall for that bank job in Topeka. He spent 15 years in a federal prison because of you. He died in there, cursing your name." He took another step forward, his hand hovering over the pistol on his hip. "My name isn't Henderson. That's my mother's name. The name we took to hide. My name is Jedediah Kane. My father was Lefty Kane, your old partner." Lefty Kane, the man I'd sold out to save my own skin. The man whose share of the money was tucked away in a dusty bank box. The money I'd planned to use to start a new life. The money I'd meant to give to Charlie. This wasn't about water. It wasn't about land. It had never been about any of that. The entire year-long harassment of my brother, the pressure, the threats, it was all a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to do one thing: lure me back. They had been using my family as bait, and like a fool, I had walked right into it. "All these years," Jedediah Kane sneered, his eyes glittering with manic triumph, "we've been waiting to finish what my father started, to wipe the name Winters from the face of this earth." He drew his gun. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the flash of metal, the tightening of his finger on the trigger. I saw my brother, Henry, raising his old shotgun, too slow, too weak. I saw Charlie, his face a mask of terror, frozen in the corner. My own hand moved without thought, a blur of motion honed by 1,000 desperate moments. The Colt was in my hand, bucking before it was even level. The roar of the shot filled the small cabin, deafening, final. Jedediah Kane staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face, a dark hole appearing in his chest. He collapsed backward through the doorway, his gun clattering on the porch boards. His two men, frozen for a heartbeat, reacted a second too late. I fired again, the bullet kicking up splinters at the feet of the man on the left, forcing him to dive for cover. Henry's shotgun boomed, the buckshot tearing through the doorframe, sending the other man scrambling back. "Charlie, the back window, go!" I yelled, shoving a small table over to use as cover. "Get to the rocks! Hide!" "But now!" Henry echoed, his voice a raw command. The boy didn't hesitate. He scrambled out the small window at the back of the cabin and disappeared. One of Kane's men started to circle around the side of the house. "I'll take the front," I yelled to Henry. "Keep him from coming around the back." Henry nodded, his face grim, and moved to cover the window Charlie had just exited. The lines of hatred on his face were still there, but now they were mingled with a grudging, desperate alliance. We weren't brothers, not yet. We were two soldiers in the same trench, fighting a common enemy that one of us had created. I crouched behind the overturned table as a bullet whizzed past my head, burying itself in the wall behind me. Another shot came from the other side of the doorway. They were trying to pin me, to get me in a crossfire. Classic pincer move. Amateurs. I took a deep breath, the familiar adrenaline singing in my veins, momentarily silencing the frantic protest of my failing heart. I was wounded, I was old, and I was outnumbered. But I was also back in my element. This was a language I understood, the brutal, simple grammar of violence. I risked a glance over the table. One of the thugs was reloading behind the corner of the porch. The other was creeping along the side of the house, trying to get a line on Henry. I had to end this fast. My shoulder was on fire, and black spots were starting to dance in my vision. I didn't have a long fight left in me. I made a decision. It was stupid. It was reckless. It was the kind of move a young man makes. But I didn't have any old man moves left. I kicked the table forward, sending it crashing into the doorway, creating a momentary obstruction. In that split second of confusion, I dove right, rolling across the floor and coming up in the opposite corner of the room. The man on the porch, his reload finished, fired 2 quick shots into the overturned table, right where I had been a second before. He'd taken the bait. I lined up my shot, my aim steady despite the pain. I squeezed the trigger. He crumpled without a sound. One left. But as I turned my attention to the other side of the house, I heard a strangled cry. Henry! I scrambled to the window. The second man had gotten the drop on him. He had Henry from behind, a knife to his throat. My brother's shotgun lay on the ground. Drop the gun, old man! The thug yelled, his eyes wild with fear and rage. Or your brother dies, again! He was dragging Henry out from behind the cabin, using him as a human shield. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful reminder of its own weakness. I had a clear shot, but it was too risky. The slightest miss, and I'd hit Henry. I said drop it, he screamed, pressing the blade harder against Henry's throat. A thin line of red appeared on my brother's weathered skin. My mind raced. There was no way out. He had me. After all these years of running, of surviving, it was going to end here, with me getting my brother killed a second time. And then I saw it. A movement in the rocks behind them, a small shadow detaching itself from the larger ones. Charlie. He hadn't run. He hadn't hidden. He was circling around them, a heavy rock clutched in his small hands. His face was set with a terrifying, adult determination. He looked at me, his green eyes meeting mine across the 20 yards that separated us. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He was waiting for a distraction. It was the craziest, most dangerous gamble of my life. I was betting everything on a 12-year-old boy, on my nephew. I took a deep breath. All right, I shouted, making my voice sound defeated. You win! I slowly, deliberately held out my Colt, handle first, and let it drop to the floor inside the cabin. The thug grinned, his grip on Henry relaxing just slightly. That's better. Now kick it out here, slow and easy. This was it. As I bent to kick the gun, I locked eyes with Henry. I saw the confusion, the betrayal on his face. He thought I was giving up. I gave him the slightest of winks, and then I screamed. Not a yell of defiance, but a terrible, agonized cry. I clutched my chest, my face contorting in a mask of genuine pain as my traitor heart seized in a fiery spasm. I collapsed to my knees, gasping. It wasn't entirely an act. The stress, the wounds, the running, it was all catching up to me at once. The thug's head whipped toward me, his attention diverted for the single second that Charlie needed. In that instant, the boy lunged from behind the rock. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was shocking in someone so small. He brought the heavy rock down on the back of the man's head with a sickening thud. The man's eyes rolled back in his head. His grip on Henry went limp, and he crumpled to the ground unconscious. Silence descended on the Broken Wheel Ranch, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the wind whispering through the broken fences. It was over. Henry stumbled away from the unconscious man, his hand at his throat where the knife had been. He looked at the bodies of the men who had terrorized him for a year. He looked at Charlie, standing over the last one, breathing heavily, the rock still in his hand. Then his eyes found mine, where I knelt in the dirt, fighting for every breath. He walked over to me, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking down at me. The hatred was gone from his eyes, replaced by something far more complicated. You were faking, he said, his voice a low rasp. It wasn't a question. Not entirely, I gasped, clutching my chest. The pain was real, a vice squeezing the life out of me. The world was starting to go gray at the edges again. He knelt down beside me, his movements stiff and slow. He looked at my face, then at the blood soaking through my shirt. He looked at his grandson, who was now running toward us. "Charlie," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "Help me get your uncle inside." Uncle, he had called me uncle. The three of us, a broken family brought together by a storm of violence, managed to get me back inside the cabin. Henry, his face a grim mask of concentration, began to work on my wounds, his old gnarled hands surprisingly gentle. He pulled the third bullet from my side with a pair of pliers sterilized in the fire, a process that was so excruciating I nearly passed out. Charlie, his own fear forgotten, assisted him, bringing clean water and bandages, his face a mixture of awe and terror at the carnage he had just witnessed and participated in. The silence between Henry and me was a heavy, suffocating blanket. There were 30 years of unspoken words, of anger and grief, packed into that small room. But the immediate threat had forged a temporary truce. We were bound not by blood, but by the shared metallic taste of survival. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long, purple shadows across the valley, we sat in the quiet cabin. The bodies of Jedediah Kane and his men had been dragged into the barn, a grim task for another time. The broken door was propped shut. Charlie was asleep on the cot, the exhaustion of the day finally claiming him. He looked so small, so young, curled up under the thin blanket. He was a boy who had been forced to do a man's work today, and I could see the toll it had taken on him. "He's a good boy," I said quietly, my voice hoarse. "You raised him well, Henry." Henry sat in his chair by the cold fireplace, staring into the embers. He didn't look at me. "I had to make up for the father he lost, for the family you cost him." The words were sharp, but they lacked the venom from before. They were just a statement of a long-held, painful fact. "I never knew," I whispered, "about my brother, about his wife. I swear to you, Henry, I ran after that job. I heard a rumor the whole posse went down. I thought, I hoped, I made myself believe I got away clean. I never knew they came looking. I never knew they found you." "It's easy to believe what you want to believe when you're running," he said, his voice flat. He finally turned to look at me, his green eyes so like Charlie's, searching my face in the dim light. "Why did you come back, Frankie? After all this time, why now?" I reached into my coat, my fingers closing around the worn folded paper of the letter I'd written so long ago. I held it out to him. He took it, his calloused fingers unfolding it carefully. He read it by the faint light of the dying fire. I knew the words by heart, words of regret, of shame, of a desperate longing for a past that could never be reclaimed, words asking for a forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. He read it twice. Then he slowly, deliberately, folded it back up and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "This letter wouldn't have changed anything then," he said softly. "Words are cheap. It's what a man does that matters." He looked over at the sleeping boy. Today you did something. You saved him. You saved us both." A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "I've hated you for 30 years, Frankie. I've blamed you every single day for taking my family from me, for turning my life into this hiding. I taught my grandson to fear the ghost of his own uncle." He took a ragged breath. Maybe I was wrong to hold on to the hate for so long. It's a heavy thing to carry. Almost as heavy as that heart of yours, I reckon." My own eyes burned. The hate. I deserved it, Henry. I still do. "Maybe," he conceded. "But the boy, he doesn't deserve to grow up with it. He needs family, not ghosts." We sat in silence for another long while, the understanding passing between us without the need for any more words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something more fragile, more tentative. It was a beginning, a possibility, the first ray of light after a long, dark night. But the night wasn't over yet. My chest tightened, a familiar, terrifying pressure. The pain was back, worse than before, a sharp, stabbing agony that radiated down my left arm. I gasped, pressing a hand to my ribs. This was it, the big one, the one I'd been running from all along. Henry was at my side in an instant, his face etched with alarm. "Frankie, my heart," I choked out, the words barely a whisper. "It's giving out." The world began to fade, the edges of my vision tunneling into darkness. The last thing I saw was Henry's face, his expression of old hatred completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, brotherly panic. The last thing I heard was his voice, calling my name, my real name, and then nothing. I drifted in a sea of gray, timeless pain. Voices came and went, muffled and distant. The cool touch of a wet cloth on my forehead, the taste of bitter herbs, the low murmur of my brother's voice, and the higher anxious tones of the boy. I was aware of time passing only in the shifting of light and shadow behind my closed eyelids. Days bled into one another. I was trapped in the wreckage of my own body, my heart a sputtering engine threatening to fail at any moment. During lucid moments, I learned that Henry, using folk remedies his wife had taught him, was fighting to keep me alive. He and Charlie took turns sitting by my bedside, forcing water and thin broth between my lips. They were nursing the very man who had brought ruin to their doorstep. One afternoon, I woke to find Charlie sitting by my bed, meticulously cleaning my Colt with an oily rag. He handled the weapon with a familiarity that was both impressive and heartbreaking. "You should rest," he said softly, not looking up from his work. "Granddaddy says the fever broke this morning." "Your granddaddy is a stubborn old fool," I rasped. A small smile touched the boy's lips. "He says the same about you." He finished wiping down the barrel and began to reassemble the firearm with practiced ease. "He told me everything," he said, his voice quiet. "About who you are, about my folks." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, Charlie, for all of it." He was silent for a moment. "Granddaddy says sorry is just a word. He says you came back. That's what matters." He looked at me then, his green eyes direct and searching. "Is that why you came back? Because you were sorry?" I thought about the real answer. The shame, the loneliness, the fear of dying alone with no one to remember my name. "I came back because he's my brother," I said, the truth of it finally settling into my bones. "And you're my nephew." "I came back because I ran out of places to run to, and the only thing I had left was family." He nodded slowly, accepting this. "The Hendersons, Jedediah Kane," he corrected himself. "They had a lockbox at their ranch. Granddaddy and I found it. It had papers in it, deeds, IOUs from other ranchers, and a map." I pushed myself up on my elbows. My interest piqued despite the pain. "A map of what?" "Of the valley," he said, pulling a folded piece of parchment from his pocket. He spread it on the bed. It was a crude drawing of the area, showing all the local ranches. But there was something else. A red line had been drawn from the spring on their land, showing a path for a dam and irrigation channels that would divert all the water directly to the Henderson property and the main rail line 10 miles south. They weren't just going to bleed the ranchers dry, I breathed, realizing the scope of their plan. They were going to sell the water rights to the railroad. They would have owned the whole territory. "There's more," Charlie said, his voice grim. In the lockbox, Henry had also found a ledger. Jedediah Kane, it turned out, was even more ambitious than his father. He was in business with a corrupt territorial official, a man who was helping him push through the land claims and water rights in exchange for a cut of the profits. The ledger detailed every bribe, every threat, every illegal act they had committed to seize control of the valley. The Hendersons weren't just land grabbers. They were part of a conspiracy that reached far higher than we could have imagined. And the ledger was the proof. "We have to get this to the marshal in Cedar Falls," I said, my mind racing. "This is bigger than us. This is the evidence that can bring the whole rotten structure down." "Granddaddy already thought of that," Charlie said. "But he's too sick to make the ride. And the official Kane was working with, he's the county man, the same one who wanted to send me to the orphanage. We can't trust him. We don't know who to trust." The weight of our situation settled on me. We were sitting on a powder keg. We had proof that could save the valley, but we were trapped. The county man would be looking for Kane. When he didn't show up, he would come looking for him here. And when he found us, and the ledger, he would bury us along with the evidence. My past hadn't just come back to haunt me. It had cornered me. It had cornered all of us. I had survived the gunfight, but I had only traded a quick death for a slower, more certain one. We were trapped between a corrupt official and my own failing body. There was no way out. And then Henry spoke from the doorway. He'd been standing there listening. "There is one way," he said, his voice weak but firm. He walked into the room, leaning heavily on his cane. "There's a man, a territorial marshal, name of Silas Thorne. He's a straight arrow, they say. Can't be bought, but he's based 2 towns over, in Sterling. It's a hard 2-day ride from here." He looked at me, his eyes clear and resolved. "I can't make that ride, you're too weak. But the boy," he looked at Charlie, "he can ride. He's fast. He knows the trails." My heart seized, and this time it had nothing to do with my condition. "No, Henry, absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If they catch him—" "It is the only way," Henry insisted, his voice like iron. "We stay here, we die. They will come for this ledger, and they will not leave witnesses. He has to go. It is his only chance. It is our only chance." I looked at Charlie, at his thin shoulders, his determined face. He wasn't a boy anymore. The events of the past few days had burned the childhood out of him. He looked back at me, his expression unwavering. "I can do it, Uncle Frank," he said, the name sounding natural on his lips. "You taught me how to read the signs, how to stay off the main trails. I can make it." The choice was impossible. Send him on a suicide mission, or stay here and wait to be slaughtered. I had spent my life making selfish choices, choices that preserved my own skin at the expense of others. But looking at this boy, my brother's grandson, my own flesh and blood, I knew I couldn't do it again. I had to protect him. "There's another way," I said, my mind suddenly clear, a desperate final plan forming. "He won't be going alone." The plan was simple, and it was suicidal. Charlie would ride for Sterling, for Marshal Thorne. He would take a secret, winding path through the high country that only he and Henry knew. But he wouldn't carry the ledger. It was too risky. If he were caught, the evidence would be lost, and he would be killed. I would ride too. I would ride east toward Cedar Falls. I would ride hard and fast, making myself as visible as possible. And I would be carrying a decoy, a false ledger designed to be found. I would be the bait. I would draw the corrupt county man and his cronies after me, leading them on a wild goose chase away from the boy. It would buy Charlie the time he needed. "No, Frankie," Henry protested immediately. "You're in no condition. You won't last 10 miles. "I'll last long enough," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "It's the only way to be sure he's safe." I looked at Charlie. "You ride like the wind, you hear me? Don't stop for anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just get to Thorne." The boy nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and pride. We spent the next hour preparing. Henry helped me dress my wounds, his silence speaking volumes. He knew this was likely the last time he would see me. He gave me his best horse, a strong bay that was faster than my own tired mare. Charlie filled a saddlebag with food and water for his journey. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, we stood outside the cabin. The air was crisp and cold. I pulled Charlie into a rough, one-armed embrace. "Be brave, son," I whispered, "and be smart. I'm proud of you." "You be safe, Uncle Frank," he mumbled into my chest. I turned to Henry. We stood for a moment, 2 old men, brothers separated by a lifetime of pain, now facing a final, uncertain parting. There were no words left to say. He simply clasped my good shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. It was enough. I mounted the bay, the false ledger tucked securely in my saddlebag. Charlie mounted his own pony. We looked at each other one last time. "Go," I said, and we rode. He, north into the secret canyons, I, east into the open plains, toward the rising sun and whatever was waiting for me there. I rode for 5 hours straight, pushing the bay harder than I should have. The pain in my chest was a constant burning fire. Every jarring step of the horse was a fresh wave of agony. But I didn't slow. I had to put as much distance as possible between myself and Charlie. I had to be seen. Near midday, I crested a rise and saw them. 2 riders coming fast. It hadn't taken them long. The county man, a portly figure in a dusty suit, and a hired gun with a mean, pinched face. They saw me. The chase was on. I urged the horse onward, my vision starting to blur. The land stretched before me, a flat, unforgiving expanse with no cover, nowhere to hide. This was it. The end of the trail. They gained on me, their horses fresh, mine fading. A gunshot cracked the air, the bullet whizzing past my ear. My heart hammered, each beat a sledgehammer against my ribs. I could feel my strength leaving me, my grip on the reins slackening. I risked a glance behind me. They were closer now. I could see the triumphant sneer on the county man's face. He knew he had me. I made it another mile before the world went black. I felt myself falling, a long, slow tumble from the saddle. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the last of the air from my lungs. I lay in the dust, the sun beating down on me, listening to the approaching thunder of their hooves. I had failed. I hadn't bought Charlie enough time. They reined in beside me. The hired gun dismounted, rolling me over roughly with his boot. He ripped the saddlebag from my horse and tossed it to the county man. "Here it is," the gunman grunted. The county man opened it, pulling out the fake ledger. He flipped through the pages, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "Perfect," he gloated. Kane might have been a fool, but he was a thorough one. He looked down at me, his smile turning cruel. "And look what we have here. The famous Franklin Winters. A loose end." He pulled his pistol. "Nothing personal, just business." I closed my eyes, ready for the end. I thought of Charlie. I prayed he was safe. I prayed I'd given him enough of a head start. But the shot never came. Instead, I heard a new sound. The sound of more horses, a lot of them, approaching at a gallop. The county man cursed. "Who in the hell is that?" I forced my eyes open. Cresting the rise behind them was a posse of at least 10 men, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver star glinting on his chest. And riding beside him on his little pony was Charlie. He hadn't ridden north. He'd circled back, seen them on my trail, and understood my plan. Instead of running, he'd ridden straight for Cedar Falls, straight to the local sheriff. He must have gambled that the sheriff wasn't on the county man's payroll. It was a gamble that had paid off. Or maybe he just found Marshall Thorne sooner than we expected. The county man and his hired gun were frozen, caught between me on the ground and the approaching lawman. Their faces were a comical picture of disbelief and panic. "It's a trap!" the gunman yelled, raising his pistol to fire at the posse. He never got the chance. A rifle shot rang out from the approaching riders, and he dropped like a stone. The county man threw his hands in the air, his face pale with terror. "Don't shoot! I surrender!" The posse surrounded us. The tall marshal dismounted and walked over, his eyes hard as iron. He looked at the dead gunman, at the cowering official, and then down at me. Charlie was right behind him, his face streaked with tears and dust. "Are you Franklin Winters?" the marshal asked, his voice a low baritone. I could only nod, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Your nephew here told us quite a story," he said, gesturing for 2 of his men to haul the county man to his feet. "And he had the ledger to prove it. He'd had the real ledger all along. He'd trusted me to be the decoy, but he'd carried the proof himself. My brave, smart boy." "You're under arrest," the marshal said to the county man, "for conspiracy, corruption, and accessory to murder." He then looked down at me, his expression softening slightly. "And you, Mr. Winters, you've got a lot to answer for too. But from what the boy tells me, you just saved this entire valley. We'll sort it all out later. Right now, let's get you to a doctor." Charlie knelt beside me, his small hand gripping my arm. "I got him, Uncle Frank. I told you I could do it." "You did, son," I whispered, a smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "You did good." The world started to fade again, but this time it wasn't a frightening darkness. It felt peaceful. I had done it. I had finally done one good thing in my miserable life. I had saved my family. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the Broken Wheel Ranch. It was no longer broken. A new roof sat on the barn. The fences were mended and strong, and a fresh coat of whitewash gleamed on the cabin walls. The winter snows had come and gone, and the valley was alive with the green promise of spring. My heart was still a ticking clock, a fact the doctor and Sterling had made abundantly clear. But it was a slower, steadier tick now. The rest, the medicine, and maybe, just maybe, The peace I had found had bought me some time. How much no one knew. But for the first time, I wasn't counting the days. I was living them. The corrupt official and his entire network had been dismantled, thanks to Henry's ledger. The territorial government had launched a full-scale investigation that had cleaned house. The ranchers of the valley were safe, their water secure. I was no longer a wanted man. In a strange twist of fate, my past crimes were pardoned in exchange for my testimony. I was given a second chance I never thought I'd get. Henry came out of the cabin carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. His cough was gone, and the stoop in his shoulders was less pronounced. The hatred in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, comfortable familiarity. We were brothers again. It had taken 30 years, a gunfight, and a near-death experience. But we had found our way back. We stood there sipping our coffee, watching Charlie out in the corral. He was working with a young colt, his movements gentle and confident. He was no longer the haunted, wary boy I had met. He was strong, happy, and full of life. He was home. "He's a natural," Henry said, a proud smile on his face. "He gets it from his grandfather," and I replied. We watched him for a while longer. The past was not forgotten. The ghosts of our mistakes, of the family we had lost, were still there. They would always be there. But they no longer haunted us. They were a part of our story, a reminder of the cost of anger and the price of redemption. I had come to this place looking for a quiet spot to die. Instead, I had found a reason to live. I had found my family. I had found my home. Sometimes the longest trails lead you right back to where you started. And if you're lucky, you find out that the person you were running from all along was yourself. And the person you were meant to be was waiting for you, right there at the end of the line. If this story of redemption and family found in the Old West touched your heart, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more tales of the frontier, where justice is hard won and family is everything. I've got a question for you all, and I'd love to see your answers in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment where a single choice changed the entire direction of your life? Let me know. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the greatest treasures aren't in gold or silver, but the people who give you a reason to fight for one more sunrise. Until next time, stay safe out there.